And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Hey, for your second listen of the day, check out Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll has you covered over there, covering everything in the conference. Well, speaking of conference, we have a non-conference game against a conference opponent to begin the season for 2025 to the 2026 in Dublin, in the Ireland. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that this is a huge game for Kansas State. The Ireland game to kick off the entire college football season. Week 0, it's only just a few months away. We are so close to already having college football back. It's going to be absolutely exciting. But the reason we're talking about it so early, well, first, we had some way too early predictions. I joined Drake Toll over on Locked On Big 12 earlier this week. We talked about earlier predictions and how I was leaning towards Kansas State to be meeting BYU in the Big 12 title game. You want to hear that conversation? You can check it out on this channel, or you can also check it out on Locked On Big 12. But the main reason why we're discussing this today is our friends over at FanDuel dropped the opening odds for the game and for some of the season futures, if you will. And I just want to discuss those and then talk about something. I was going through some research while I was getting ready for the game and went through some of the old Ireland games. And what I've realized, for the most part, winning that first game, and that this isn't rocket science, folks, but winning that first game is crucial for having a successful season. And we have some historical trends to talk about. A little fun one. Obviously, it's not going to be, said and done. It's a very small sample size, but something fun to talk about here in the offseason. But first, let's get to the odds. I think that's going to be the fun one first. And I probably should get to the right page on that one here in my handy dandy notebook. But first off, Kansas State, although they lost to Iowa State in Farmageddon, Iowa State went to the Big 12 championship. The Wildcats are currently a 2.5-point favorite as of right now in this game heading into Dublin. Interesting right off the bat, right? You have a great recruiting class. You have an awesome transfer portal. To be completely honest, Iowa State didn't lose much either. And although they've lost some of their top wide receivers, they retooled with some nice receivers themselves. I think it's going to be a really good game. I'm interested to see why they thought they already should give Kansas State a -2.5 spread, but I'll take it. So if you think that is going to go even farther away and you think that that's something you're interested in, you should slam that early. Speaking of slamming some odds early, let's talk about some fun ones here. We got 2 on the books. Plus 12,000. You ever watch The Office? You ever hear Kevin when he says you get the odds and it's ever plus 10,000? You take that odds every single time. Well, how about 12,000? That is the current future odds for Kansas State to win the national championship in the 2025/2026 season in next year. That is currently tied for 31st in all of odds in college football. So right now, that is right where they're sitting. That tracks to where the AP poll put Kansas State to finish the year. They received votes. They were not in the top 25, but if you put the votes together and you rank them, Kansas State finished 30th in the country, according to the Associated Press. So they're tied for 31st, plus 12,000 odds. Interesting, right? That's an interesting one for sure. If you think that is something you want to play, I definitely recommend that you give that one a whirl. And then here's one more before we dig into this interesting historical trends about Dublin. How about Avery Johnson being a plus 7,500 Heisman Trophy winner? How about that? Plus 7,500? How about even being super bold and taking that on a parlay? Imagine the odds of the national championship and Avery Johnson as the Heisman Trophy winner. When's the last time somebody won the Natty and the Heisman? It's been a minute. I can't remember off the top of my head. Wasn't last year, that's for sure. But Avery Johnson tied for 30th in those odds as well. Interesting thoughts here. What do you think? Let me know in the comment description below. If you're listening in podcast, you can hit me up on Twitter X at Christian S. Rao, or you can just join over to YouTube and drop the comment if you will. Love to have you have the conversation. What do you think about those odds? Do you think Kansas State deserves to be a 2.5-point favorite? Do you like 12,000 odds? Do you think that's something worth throwing a couple bucks on to maybe you forget about now it's January and next January when it's all said and done, You got basically a second tax return. I mean, it's something could be fun to play around with. For what about Avery Johnson? You think he has a chance to be a Heisman Trophy winner in year 2 as a starter with this new tall receiving core, with this interesting tight end room he has, with Dylan Edwards behind him, the speedy Dylan Edwards? Could be fun. Could be fun things to talk about. Maybe we'll dig into that as a fun segment. Maybe we'll have somebody on to discuss that. But let's talk about this historical trend I keep talking about here. Since 2012, there has been 6 games in Ireland. It was one in 2012, 2014, 2016. Then they took a little bit of a hiatus and went back in 2022, 23, 24. And then Kansas State and Iowa State will be back in 2025. So since 2012, now there's been some games before that, but just for the sake of this exercise, I only went back that far because there was another longer break between 2012 and I can't remember the last time it was, but it was farther away. But between those, the winner of the game in Ireland are 3-2 in bowl games when their season's over. And one of those losses in a bowl game was a loss in a national championship. So take that as you will. 5 of the 6 teams, with the exception of the 2022 Northwestern team, and might I add, the only win they had that season was in Ireland against Nebraska. But every other team that year was bowl eligible. You had one team go to the national championship, and that was in 2012, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They won their game in Ireland. I believe it was against Navy. And they went on to go to the national championship, losing to Alabama in the 2012 national championship. They were 12-1 on the season. Now, let's put this in the perspective of the case of the college football playoffs. Both of these are going to probably go to Notre Dame, but 2 of these 6 teams would probably be in the college football playoffs. I mean, 1/3 of the Ireland winners since 2012 would probably have qualified for the college football playoffs. If you are Kansas State, or in this case, Iowa State, but we're leaning towards the Wildcats here. If you see those odds and you believe in historical trends, 1/3, that sounds like a pretty good idea. That sounds pretty good. The 33% chance of making the 12-team college football playoffs if you win the first game in Ireland. Now, again, small sample size. This is a complete hypothetical. And I know we're not the SEC, but look at me making hypotheticals. However, that's a fun little exercise we did. Now, the 2 that I believe would probably make the college football playoffs, again, would be the 2012 Notre Dame team, who went to the national championship that year. So obviously they would have made the college football playoffs. And I think that Notre Dame would have also made it in 2023. Now, they were 10-3 that year. They wound up winning their bowl game. They won the Sun Bowl that year. I think they would have also made it that year as well. Personally, I think it would probably been a lower seed. They might have been maybe one of the last at-large teams, but I gave them the nod for this exercise. Looking at the other records in 2014, Penn State was the winner. That was James Franklin's first year at Penn State. They went 7-6 that year. They also won their bowl game. 2016 and 2024 were both winners by Georgia Tech. They finished 9-4 and 7-6 those seasons respectively. Georgia Tech went 1-1 in their bowl games. They lost their bowl game this past season in the Birmingham Bowl. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, in 2022, Northwestern beat Nebraska, and it was the only win of the season. Now, obviously, there were some coaching issues happening that year with Pat Fitzgerald, all that stuff. If you remember with Northwestern, their season went completely down the drain after the beginning, but it was an upset to begin with anyways against Nebraska. That was a wild year for both those programs with Scott Frost leaving and Pat Fitzgerald. 2022 was a wild year, but fun little exercise we have here. If you believe in that stuff, or if it's just something to laugh about as you're listening down the road, or whatever the case may be, as we're in off-season mode right now, you're heading into Dublin, and you have this historical trends back behind you. You've had teams that have been to national championships after starting their year in Dublin. Know what that tells me? It tells me there's a chance. That's all it tells me, and we know that from the start. Kansas State has a great team heading into the new year. They have a tough schedule. Don't get me wrong. You have to play 10 Big 12 teams, even though only 9 of them count for conference play. You got to play a non-conference game against Army, who, if they're anything like they were this past year, is no G5 scrub. They're just as good as some of the Big 12 teams, right? So this is a team that can make it to the college football playoffs. They can compete for a Big 12 championship, but it all starts with the first kickoff of the year for the entire country, outside the country, but for the entire world of college football in week 0. Really excited for that game. -2.5 point favorites to start it off. Gotta love that one.